Hello, my name is Nathan Taylor, also known as Sockmatician, and this tutorial is one of a short series of tutorials showing the correct yarn management for triple knitting. Triple knitting being a multi-layered form of knitting, not just knitting with 3 colours. And this tutorial is particularly for people who hold their yarns with 2 in the right hand and 1 in the left. This is my preferred and most comfortable way of doing triple knitting, but that doesn't mean it's going to work necessarily for you. Whatever works for you best is going to be the right way to go. So let's just talk a little bit about yarn colour management and placement. I've got 3 yarns here, pink, blue and green, as you can see, and I've assigned them the letters A, B and C. So yarn A is my pink yarn B is my blue, and yarn C is my green. And it's a good idea because you keep ABC cycles through. That's a sequence that doesn't really change throughout this type of knitting. So I like to keep my yarns arranged on my fingers also in ABC. As you can see, pink is over to the right, blue is in the middle, and the green one, the yarn C, is over on the left. That just helps me keep things in my head, knowing exactly where things are supposed to be and what colour I'm supposed to use next. Once you have knitted a stitch for the top layer, you bring that yarn to the front, then you work the stitch for the middle layer, and then you bring that one to the front, and then you work the stitch for the bottom layer, and then take all the yarns to the back. That's the general principle. This particular, these 3 layers are arranged as a knit purl layer. So I've got 2 layers which I'm going to work. The first and the second layer will be knit stitches, and the third layer will be worked as a purl stitch. Working then with yarn A, I'm going to knit the first stitch of the set and bring yarn A only to the front. You can see that yarn B is still behind my needle. Then I'm going to knit with yarn B and bring it to the front as well. Then, because that third layer is a purl stitch, I'm going to bring yarn C to the front and purl that third stitch of the set with it. Then I can take all the yarns to the back, ready to start once more. Let's do that again. Knit with yarn A and bring yarn A only to the front. Knit with yarn B, bring that one to the front, also bring yarn C to the front, ready to purl. Bit quicker then. Knit with yarn A to the front, knit with yarn B and C to the front, ready to purl. And there you go. Things start to look a little bit different when you're working with a different colour in the top layer. It's still the same principle though, of work with one yarn and bring it to the front, work with the next yarn and bring it to the front before working with the third. But because of how the yarns are placed on my fingers, getting at them and using them without getting things in a muddle is a little bit different from how it is if it's just a simple ABC set. This set of stitches is BCA, so we've got B on the top, C in the middle and yarn A on the bottom layer, and it is worked as follows. Thankfully, you don't need to do any rearranging of yarns in your hands. You can keep everything as it is, otherwise this kind of knitting would be very impractical if you were to be knitting a large or complex pattern. So we're going to knit with yarn B then, and bring that yarn only to the front. Note that yarn A is still behind the needle. Then we can knit with yarn C and bring that one to the front. Now we want to bring yarn A to the front so we can do the purl stitch with it, but because yarn B is already in front of the needle has to go behind yarn B, and then yarn A can come to the front so that we can purl with it. But when we purl with it, we have to remember the needle needs to go behind yarn B once again. Oops. And then we can purl with yarn A and take all the yarns to the back. Now I know that's a little bit tricky, so I'll show you that 5 more times. Knit with yarn B and bring it to the front. Knit with yarn C, bring it to the front. Then the needle goes behind yarn B, so bring A to the front, ready to purl with it. But in order to purl with it, again, we have to go behind yarn B. And then we can purl with yarn A and take it to the back. Once more then, knit with yarn B to the front, knit with yarn C to the front. The needle goes behind B to bring A to the front to purl with it, behind B. We're always going behind yarn B, behind yarn B, if you want to think of it that way. Knit with B to the front, knit with C to the front, go behind B to bring A to the front, behind B to purl with A. So once you get the hang of it, it's not that tricky. It took me a little bit of a while to figure out exactly what was going on, but now I know, my hands know what to do. It doesn't feel too difficult at all. Now we're going to work the sets of stitches which begin with yarn C. So these are going to be CAB, CAB, CAB as we work along. The same principles exist exactly as before. We're going to knit with yarn C and bring it to the front. Then we're going to knit with yarn A, and can you notice I'm making sure I go over the top of yarn B, so I can knit with yarn A, because we want to keep B as the back layer, and bring that to the front as well as yarn B ready to purl. So those two yarns can come to the front in one fluid motion. We're going to knit with yarn C, bring it to the front, knit with yarn A, bring both to the front, and purl with yarn B. Once again, knit with yarn C, bring it to the front, knit with yarn A, bring both to the front, and purl with yarn C. That shows you how to do the 3 different types of sets that you would come across when working this style of triple knitting in the round. There are 3 other types of set if you're working backwards and forwards, because on the return rows the rotation goes the other way, so ABC will become CBA, and I am just about to turn my work and I will show you how that works in a moment. I've now turned my work and I'm ready to start working the return row on the other side of my swatch. The thing to remember with triple knitting worked flat is that center layer, that middle hidden layer on the way out was worked as a knit row, but on the way back needs to be worked as a purl row. So your yarn management is going to be very different, because obviously purl stitches require the yarn to be at the front before you make the stitch, and that's going to change things quite substantially. So I've matched my yarns on my fingers the same as I had before with this first section A, B, C. So I'm now calling blue A, pink B, and green C. I've attached the letters to the yarns in the order that I'm going to work them in the first section of colour. That just helps things stick in my mind a little bit better. So we've still got A, B, C, even though the colours are now different. Don't let that fool you. So as before, we can then just work a yarn A stitch and bring it to the front and yarn B, ready to purl that middle one. So that's slightly different from before. Then we bring yarn C to the front, ready to purl with it, and take the yarns to the back. So it's exactly the same, A, B, C, except you bring yarn B to the front earlier than you did before. Yarn A gets knitted with, A and B to the front, purl with yarn B, C to the front, and purl with it. Nice and straightforward. A, yarn A and B to the front, B, C to the front, purl, C. 2 more of those then. We're going to knit with yarn A and bring it to the front. Yarn B comes to the front at the same time, ready to purl with it. Yarn C comes to the front to purl with it as well. One more time. Knit with yarn A and B to the front, purl with yarn B, C to the front, purl with yarn C. Now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to this time have a yarn B stitch on the front top layer. The reason why I changed the colours around is so that A, B and C are actually positions on your fingers, so that you can really keep in mind what you're actually doing. A, B and C are positions on your fingers rather than colours of yarn. So we're going to knit with yarn B. B and C come to the front, so we can purl with yarn C. Now we want to bring yarn A to the front, and just as when we started a B set before, the needle has to go behind yarn B to bring A to the front, and we can purl going behind yarn B and purl with yarn A. That's exactly the same set of movements as it was before, so that shouldn't be nice and familiar to you. We're just purling that second stitch instead of knitting it as we were in the outward rows. Knit with yarn B, B and C to the front, purl with yarn C, A to the front where you go behind yarn B, and purl with yarn A behind yarn B. Knit with yarn with yarn B, bring both to the front and purl with yarn C. go behind yarn B so yarn A can come to the front, and purl with it, going behind yarn B. It's always behind yarn B. It's always the tricky maneuver there. Knit with yarn B, bring it and yarn C to the front, purl with yarn C, go behind yarn B to bring A to the front, so you can purl with yarn A behind yarn B. Knit with yarn B, bring B and C to the front, purl with yarn C, go behind yarn B to pick up yarn A at the front, bring it to the front, so purl with it, sorry, behind yarn B and take all to the back. Knit with yarn B, B and C to the front, purl with yarn C, A to the front, making sure you go behind yarn B to get it, and then purl with yarn yarn A behind yarn B. And that leaves us with our KPP sets of stitches where yarn C is on the top. So we are going to knit with yarn C, bring it and yarn A to the front. We can then purl with yarn A, making sure that we leave yarn B completely out of it there behind, only purling with yarn A. Take that to the back, and then we can bring yarn B to the front and purl with it. And the yarns go back to the back. Knit with yarn C, bring it and yarn A to the front, purl with yarn A, making sure that B stays out of the way, bring yarn B to the front and purl with that as well. All yarns to the back. So it's all quite straightforward once you've got the basic idea. Knit with yarn C, bring it to the front, bring yarn A to the front to purl with it, leaving B out of the way, bring yarn B to the front and you can purl with it like so. It's all very straightforward once you are aware of the order in which you need to do things and making sure you know to keep certain yarns out of the way at certain points. And those are the 6 ways of doing triple knitting, working each set with the different sides of the fabric and the different ways of managing the yarn, keeping everything in place. Zip!